Welcome back. As we said, the Russia investigation is entering a critical stretch with Paul Manafort back in the spotlight. Democrats are pushing for legislation to protect special counsel Robert Mueller's probe from interference. They're calling for it to be included in negotiations to avoid a government shutdown next week if it doesn't pass on its own. Retiring Arizona Senate Republican Jeff Flake joined in and said he will oppose all judicial nominees unless the bill gets a vote. But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said today that he'd likely block senators' attempt to bring up the bill, calling it a solution in search of a problem. I'm joined now by California Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, a member of the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees. Congressman, good to see you.
You too, Katie. Thanks for having me back.
Focus a little bit on the Intelligence Committee in the House and what you guys plan on doing come January. Are you going to reopen the investigation into Donald Trump and Russia?
We're not going to conduct an investigation that revisits questions that have already been answered, but we are going to fill in the gaps, particularly around money laundering. There's a long history of Donald Trump seeking to invest in Russia or Russians investing in Donald Trump, and we see that that's driving foreign policy decisions by the president. So we will look at those past transactions where Republicans were unwilling. And we'll also, I think, put to bed all the questions around the June 9 Trump Tower meeting, where the president's son had knowledge of dirt being offered on Hillary Clinton and whether or not candidate Trump knew about it at the time. But it's going to be limited and precise, and I think answer many questions Republicans kept us from getting into.
Well, when you say put to bed, who are you going to be calling? What are you hoping to get answered? Remind our viewers.
Yeah, if you recall, there was a blocked number. So Russians called Donald Trump Jr. They set up a meeting, moving heaven and earth to make it happen at Trump Tower to offer dirt on Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump Jr. talks to a blocked number, and then he calls back to Russia. We know from other witnesses that candidate Trump had a blocked number that would show up if he was to call someone. And so we want to know if Donald Trump Jr. called his father, because that would explain a lot of the statements candidate Trump would make throughout the summer of 2016 about new information coming about Hillary Clinton. So if he had knowledge that these hacks had occurred or that Russia was working for him, that would explain a lot, and also, I think, make him be held a lot more accountable for what Russia did.
How do you get that information? Is it call logs? Are you going to subpoena the phone company?
That's exactly right, Katie. You would subpoena the telephone provider. Now, I fear that the Republicans have obstructed this for so long that they may not be available. As a former prosecutor, I knew that there was a limited window of time for most bank records, cell phone records, travel logs, and this delay may jeopardize our ability to get it, but we're going to try. When
you're looking at money laundering, are you only looking at Russia, or do you plan to look at other countries as well?
Well, in real time, as we speak right now, we see that the president's prior financial transactions with Saudi Arabia may be also dictating foreign policy. Again, this country and leaders there bailed out the president while he was in bankruptcy, buying his yachts, buying his New York hotel properties. And now this is the first country he visited when he was president. A U.S. resident working for a U.S. publication was killed on the soil of a NATO ally. And the president is, again, undermining our own intelligence community's findings. And so, yes, we want to see if that is driving his decision. And now a majority in Congress being Democratic, we can seek to intervene and protect our national security.
What's the motivation to limit the scope of these investigations, not fully open the Russia investigation back up?
To not waste time, to recognize that the American people largely want us to focus on doing what we can to protect health care, investing in infrastructure, making sure that we get background checks on firearm purchases, and putting in place prescription drug reforms to bring down the cost there, things that the president has actually said that he's willing to do. But there was a Republican Congress for 2 years that gave the president immunity. You saw presidential immunity for 2 years where he conducted a number of different abuses, and he was never checked on those. And so there will now be a balance of power on these abuses of power.
If Donald Trump pardons Paul Manafort down the line, say after the Russia investigation is closed, will the Democrats object? Will they, draw up articles of impeachment? What do the Democrats plan on doing, if anything?
Well, I see that as a red line. I see that as obstruction of justice. Certainly if he offered or dangled the expectation of a pardon to Paul Manafort and that led to the end of the cooperation agreement. Now, Paul Manafort backing out of this agreement and lying has to be looked at in the context of, one, Matt Whitaker's now the Attorney General and he can give Donald Trump a window of the investigation. Two, Donald Trump just submitted his answers to Bob Mueller, and so the Trump team may be worried that Manafort testimony could contradict those answers. And it's happening at the same time that Jerome Corsi is backing out. I don't think these are coincidences. Knowing this gang, they very might well be related. And I would say, again, that's a red line if the president were to do that.
Do you think legislation is needed immediately to protect the Mueller investigation? And if so, are you willing to force a government shutdown over it?
Well, I'm willing to hold back my vote to support bipartisan legislation that the Republicans will need Democratic votes for. And Katie, what I'm saying is, the House and the Senate right now controlled by Republicans. They have been unable for the last 2 years to pass any budget with their own votes, so they've had to come to Democrats. So if they want Democratic votes, our position is you need to pass the special counsel Protect Mueller bill that's already been passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee with bipartisan support. That should be pretty easy, and I don't understand why they'd want to create any more uncertainty around this investigation.
McConnell says it's basically DOA. In the Senate. Is it worth pushing it if it's not going to get anywhere in the Senate?
The rule of law is worth pushing, and Mitch McConnell is subverting the will of the majority in the Senate right now, particularly from the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I'll commend Senator Grassley for bringing that forward. But Mitch McConnell should bring it to a vote, because I believe if in both houses it was brought to a vote, a majority of the members would support it. You have leadership elections tomorrow. Are you confident in the leaders that are currently the front runners, Pelosi, Hoyer, et cetera? Nancy Pelosi will be chosen as our Speaker nominee, and that's because she's the most effective leader we have. And then from now until January 3rd, she'll continue to earn the support of members, and I expect we will unify on the 3rd and do the work that the American people elected us to do. Congressman Eric Swalwell. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us. My pleasure. Thank you.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.